Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come down and speak. I get a lot of opportunities to talk to a lot of different groups, and I really enjoy speaking to folks who are interested in politics, because I think that we really need a lot of folks in the pipeline. And anytime I can come and encourage people to get involved in the political process, whether as a legislator yourself, a political candidate, or getting involved as a staffer, or working in some other capacity in the political process, I think it's incredibly important. I actually stumbled into this this job. I did not set out to do this, as you heard in the great introduction. I actually started out in journalism. I was a journalism major at the University of Missouri. In my senior year, I transferred down to Missouri State University to finish up my degree while I went to work at a radio station, because the two things that I swore I would never be were a lawyer and a politician. And the reason I was going to avoid those things is because that's what my dad is. My dad is a lawyer. That's why I was born in Kansas City. He was up at UMKC Law School as I was being born, and he just is a great dad. Love him dearly. I did not want his life. He immediately went into politics as the elected prosecutor of Taney County, Missouri, which is his home county, down in the Branson area, and then was the elected prosecutor for nearly 2 decades, and then moved on to a judicial position, which in that part of the state is also an elected position. He is a Republican. I'm actually the only Democrat in my family, which is not why I didn't want to do what he was doing. I just didn't want to have a life. I didn't want to have a life of running for election and asking people for votes and money and all that sort of thing. And I didn't want to be a lawyer either, for that matter. I was just one of those kids who wanted to do the opposite of what my dad wanted me to do. And thankfully I had very, very fantastic parents who encouraged me to kind of do whatever I wanted to do, and that really helped things a lot. But after I had been in radio for about 7 years, I got a raise after 7 years at the same radio station, up to $6 an hour. And I was going into work one morning, and the McDonald's right at the entrance to my radio station had a sign up, and their starting salary was $6.25 an hour, and they had paid benefits and insurance and days off and 401k and all this kind of stuff. And I hadn't had a day off in 2 years. I had no health insurance. I had nothing going on. I was like, this has got to stop. And my dad offered me a job at his law firm for $6.50 an hour, and then kind of just all fell into line after that. So I moved to Kansas City, went to law school, fell back in love with Kansas City. I just absolutely fell in love with the place, and decided I was going to just stay in Kansas City, and that was going to be my focus. And then as things happen and your life moves forward, all of a sudden you're kind of thrust into a situation where someone says to you, you know what, this seat is open, you should run for this. And I said, I haven't run for anything since I ran for student body president in Branson High School in 1988. They said, well, did you win that? And I said, yes. They said, well, all right, you're 1-0. I mean, let's go for it. And so I did, and decided to go ahead and run. And it was a difficult decision. I was in the middle of my law career. I really love my job at my law firm. I've been at the same law firm since I graduated from law school in 1998, excuse me. I worked for the law firm of Shook, Hardy & Bacon in Kansas City. In the first 5 years that I was there, I represented food, drug, and beverage manufacturers. So, for instance, I represented Miller Brewing Company, Kraft Foods. Anytime they were sued, I was one of the lawyers that defended the company. And so there were some really interesting cases that took me all over the country. And after about 5 years of that, I decided I really wanted to go into kind of more of a public service type of thing, but I didn't really want to leave my firm. So I had my first lobbying experience, and this is one of the things I wanted to talk about today, is the importance of kind of gaining these experiences regardless of where you are in life. I actually put together a brief of sorts on why my firm needed a full-time director of pro bono legal services, and why that person should be me. And I started lobbying our executive committee. And just so you know, our firm has over 500 lawyers. We've got offices around the world. So this is, and there's 2,000 or 3,000 employees. I forget from day to day how many. And so it was kind of a big task to convince them that they should let me stop billing my time to all of these clients and start doing only free legal work. And I went around, I started my first lobbying project, and I got one guy on board, and then I got a woman on board, and then all of a sudden I was able to go to each office and say, okay, I've got these 3 people on board, and eventually they caved. And I was just so thankful when 2 years later I came back to him. I said, thank you for giving me my dream job. Now I need you to let me run for office. And the good news is that they were willing, and one of the reasons they were willing is one of the reasons I'm going to talk about here for a second. There are very few lawyers in the Missouri legislature, and one of the things that the Missouri Bar has been trying to do, and some of the partners at my firm over the years, is encourage more lawyers to go into the legislature. I think that surprises a lot of people. I think folks think that most of the time the legislature is just buggy with lawyers, but it's just not the case. Does anyone know what the #1 profession in the Missouri legislature is?
Executives, anonymous.
It is farmer. So I don't know if that surprises anybody, but yeah, it's farmer, it's agriculture. And you know, it shouldn't surprise folks because first of all, agriculture is the #1 industry in the state of Missouri. So our industry in the state of Missouri, with the exception of some manufacturing and tourism, is all about agriculture. That's what we do in this state. And the legislative session is actually set up around the planting season. So we get down there in January, and we stay through about the 3rd week of May. We take a break off, we take a week off in usually March. A lot of the guys, and they're usually guys, go home and plant some of their crops during that spring break, and then they spend the summer, you know, working their farms, and then they come back in January. So it's kind of an interesting process. It's been really interesting. The #2 profession, by the way, in the Missouri legislature is actually retiree, which means I'm also in the minority for another reason. I'm pretty young when it comes to legislators. I don't even feel that young anymore. Kind of that 40 under 40 thing you were talking about, I just kind of skated in under that one. That was really nice of them to let me in at the last second. But for a while there were only, in the state Senate, there's 34 state senators. And there were only, I believe, for a while, 4 or 5 of us that were under 40. We had an under 40 caucus. They tried to stretch it out for me for a little bit, and we did the 40 and under, and then we did 41 and under, and now I'm just probably too old. I'm 42 now. But even though I'm at that age, I'm still one of probably the 7 youngest senators right now in the Missouri State Senate. So, you know, a lot of folks are like, what's it like to be a minority in the Missouri State Senate? Well, I would say it's interesting on a bunch of different angles. As I mentioned, there are 34 state senators in the state of Missouri. And I'm not just in the minority because I'm a Democrat, and the majority of the folks down there are Republicans. But I am in the deep minority when it does come to partisan politics because we have only 10 Democrats in the state of Missouri out of the 34. And that's up, by the way, from last year. We were down to 8. We dipped to an all-time low at 7, I guess 2 years ago, and then we picked up an extra seat through kind of a retirement thing that was kind of unique, and we brought in somebody. And then we're up to 10 now, and that was kind of through the electoral process, and we can talk a little bit about that here in a minute. But I'm also one of only 5 women in the Missouri Senate, so there's 34 state senators and only 5 of us are women. I know that's not the lowest ever, obviously, but it's the lowest in a very long time. And the thing that's interesting now is there's no Republican women left in the Senate, and that's for the first time in as long as really anyone can remember, probably close to 2 decades, that there hasn't been a Republican woman in the Senate. So it's kind of interesting right now that the entire Women's Caucus is now all Democrat. I'm diverse because I'm the only openly gay member of the Missouri State Senate. As I mentioned, I'm only one of 5 lawyers in the Senate. There are so many different reasons that I am a minority in the Senate. It's quite unbelievable. And I would say that makes it hard, but I have to tell you that I think it probably makes it better. One of the things that I tell folks, no matter who I'm talking to, it could be college students, it could be rural electric co-ops, it could be women's groups, is if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. So think about that for a minute. If you don't have a seat at the table, if you're not there actually making the decisions are going to be made for you. So if women's issues are important to you and there's not a woman at the table, you're not going to be looked out for. People aren't going to be interested in what your issues are. The same goes with your profession. The same goes with your sexual orientation, your gender identity. I mean, geographic area. It's incredibly important to have a diverse mix of folks. And that's why I'm happy to carry this mantle of being a minority in so many different ways, because it gives a voice to several communities that might not have a voice otherwise. So I like to tell folks that when I first got elected that, everything was, horrible and awful, and I got down there and it was a bad place for women and a bad place for an openly gay person, but frankly, it really wasn't. It really is interesting because of the work that so many people did before me, people like, Lily Ledbetter, for instance, that you heard from last night, and folks who have really actually fought these fights for us over the years. It was pretty easy getting down there at first. Now, I'm not going to say it wasn't without bumps. When you first get elected to the Missouri legislature, you get to go on a freshman tour. And this freshman tour is pretty cool because you get on a bus with all of the other legislators across the state, and you go around and you tour all of the stuff in the state of Missouri that we spend your state taxpayer dollars on. So we tour universities, we tour prisons, hospitals, we look at manufacturing facilities, we look at all sorts of different things across the state. And one of the stops that we made was down in Farmington, Missouri. Is there anyone from that neck of the woods, kind of Boot Heel-ish area? Well, down in Farmington, one of the biggest industries down there is the prison industry. And one of the facilities that they have down there is called SWORDS, and it's actually a sexual offender treatment center, and it's for folks who are going to be actually locked up for the rest of their lives. These are people who have committed sexual offenses, who have served their time in the Department of Corrections, and they have then had a civil commitment where the state of Missouri has made the decision that they're going to be locked up for the rest of their lives in this facility, unless they can prove that they've been rehabilitated. And just so you know, I think there has either never been one person released from this facility, or one person is in the process right now of being released. So I mean, truly, this is a place where it's a tough place. There's a lot of folks there who are going to be spending the rest of their lives there, and the security is higher than any place I've ever been. It was as high as some U.S. embassies that I've been to on foreign soil. Has anyone ever had the chance to go to a Democratic or Republican National Convention by any chance? Or anywhere where the president is speaking? The security, okay, so you understand the security is incredibly heightened. So even our bus, which was filled with state legislators, when it pulled onto the property, they had dogs everywhere, they had mirrors that they had to put under the bus to make sure there weren't people or explosives under the bus. I mean, it's incredibly high security. So I hop off the bus, and we're all a little on edge just because of where we are and the security level. And I hop off, and there's a big guy standing there. He's probably 6 foot something. He has no neck. He's bald head, and he just thrusts his hand out. And he's, "Senator Justice, I'm the redneck homophobe that banned gay marriage in the state of Missouri." And I'm just speechless because I don't know what to say to this guy. I'm like, "Hey, nice to meet you, Jolie Justice." I don't have any idea what to say to this guy because, I mean, he's being friendly, but he leads with, "I'm a redneck homophobe." Well, good news is I was raised in Branson, Missouri by Republicans in the Ozark Mountains. I can get along with anybody. And so, I'm just like, all right, that's cool. Jolie, nice to meet you. And so, we shake hands, and that was pretty much the extent of the conversation. We didn't talk much more about that. But all of my fears are starting to be realized because when I first got elected, all I really knew about the folks that I was going to serve with is I had heard anecdotes about a couple of the guys who represented eastern Jackson County because they were kind of peculiar characters who had some interesting bents as far as, or interesting political views that I didn't really subscribe to. So I knew about those guys. I'd also heard a story about a senator out of south central Missouri, the West Plains area, and he had, and it was pretty cool what he did, the year before I got to the legislature, there was this huge fight on the Senate floor, and it was between telephone companies and cable companies. And just so you know, everything that we do down in Jefferson City, 90% of what we do down in Jefferson City is insanely boring. 10% is the stuff that hits the news every night, but most of it is these crazy fights between utility companies, fights between licensed professional counselors and licensed clinical social workers, and all of these just little tiny things that the state regulates, but it's not incredibly interesting. So the only stuff you see that hits the news is the stuff that's really controversial. But the one thing that I had heard about this fight the year before between the cable and telephone companies is that this senator out of south central Missouri had stood up as part of the debate and offered an amendment, and he said that no cable company or satellite company in the state of Missouri could show the movie Brokeback Mountain.